Every morning before the first light of dawn settled over the village, Emma rose quietly and tied her faded apron around her waist. Her small home was barely more than a shed on the edge of town, but it was where her mother lay, weak and fading from an illness they couldn't afford to name. Much less cure, Emma's hands were calloused from long hours lifting baskets and scrubbing vegetables, but she never complained. She made her way to the market and set up her modest stall, arranging tomatoes, onions, and greens with care. Each coin she earned didn't go toward treats or new shoes. It went toward her mother's medicine and sometimes barely enough food for two. Yet somehow Emma always found a way to keep aside a crust of bread or a slice of fruit for the man who sat quietly by the market gate. His name was Ben, or at least that's what she started calling him, though he never confirmed it. He wore the same dusty coat every day, sat with a cane between his knees and dark glasses covering his eyes. The other vendors said he was blind useless, just another mouth draining the town's patience. Children ran past and hurled pebbles or insults his way. "Get lost, old man," they'd shout. "You're scaring away customers." Emma, watching from her stall, couldn't bear it. One afternoon, she walked over, brushed the kids aside with a firm hand, and gently placed a slice of bread in the bowl beside him. "It's not much," she whispered, "but I hope it helps." Ben didn't say a word at first, just nodded with a quiet, almost reverent gesture. That was the beginning. Emma continued the ritual every day. Some days she brought a few berries, others a piece of boiled yam or a heel of stale bread. She never asked for thanks, and he never asked for more. But the village noticed. "That girl's a fool," muttered a baker. "She feeds a beggar when her own mother's dying at home." Others scoffed, accusing her of playing. Saint Emma heard the whispers. They stung like nettles under the skin, but she kept walking. Something in Ben's silent presence anchored her, a reminder that kindness wasn't measured by wealth but by will, and Emma, though poor in coin, was rich in heart. Her Aunt Denise saw things differently. A tall woman with cold eyes and a voice sharp enough to slice bread, Denise believed in survival over sentiment. She'd taken Emma in after her father died, but made it clear that charity had limits. "You think feeding that blind fool helps anyone?" She snapped one afternoon, grabbing Emma's wrist tightly. "We can't afford morals. Not when your mother might not see another week." Emma tried to pull away, her voice shaking. "I just can't ignore him." Denise sneered. "Kindness won't save you. Girl, it's weakness. You'll learn that the hard way." That night, Emma sat beside her mother's bed. The old woman's breathing was shallow, her skin like parchment stretched thin. Emma held her hand, brushing a cool cloth across her brow. "I'll find a way," she whispered. "I promise." Her mother's eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Keep your heart soft, Emmy," she said. "This world will try to harden it. Don't let it." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she nodded. Storing those words like treasure days turned to weeks. Emma's income stayed meager, and her mother's condition worsened. Still, the daily gesture continued. Bread in Ben's bowl, a moment of wordless connection. She noticed small things, the way Ben tilted his head when she approached, how his hand never searched, but reached with quiet precision. Doubt flickered at the edges of her thoughts, but she shoved it aside. Whether blind or not, beggar or not, he was someone the world had forgotten, and if no one else would care, Emma would, because that's what her mother raised her to do. Not to judge, not to fear, but to serve with a full heart, even when her hands were nearly empty. The weight of Emma's world grew heavier the moment Aunt Denise returned from the village council with a triumphant glint in her eye. That evening, while Emma was washing clothes by the firelight, Denise sat down beside her and announced her decision as though declaring a weather change. "You'll be marrying Mr. Carter," she said flatly. Emma froze. "What?" she asked, barely able to turn around. "He's older," Denise continued, "but wealthy. He's agreed to pay a generous bride price. With that money, we can finally get your mother proper care." Emma's heart dropped. Mr. Carter was twice her age, a man known for his controlling temper and deep pockets. "I won't marry him," Emma whispered. Standing slowly, Denise's voice turned cold. "You will do as I say. We don't have the luxury of choice." Over the following days, Emma begged her aunt to reconsider. She pleaded, cried, even knelt once her pride swallowed whole in a moment of desperation. But Denise wouldn't relent. "You're doing this for your mother," she snapped. "So stop acting like a spoiled child." Emma clung to hope, holding tight to the few coins she had managed to save, just enough to buy another small bottle of medicine. She hid them carefully in the folds of her mattress, promising herself she'd make it through one more week. But one morning, when she reached for them before heading to the market, her pouch was gone. Panic surged through her as she tore through the sheets and floorboards. Nothing. When she rushed out to confront Denise, the older woman stood with her arms folded, her eyes cold and unmoved. "Looking for something," she sneered. Emma's hands trembled. "You took it," she said, voice hoarse. "It was for Mama." Denise didn't blink. "And now it will help save her, just not in the way you imagined." Mr. Carter increased the offer. Emma's knees buckled. She felt like the world had spun beneath her and left her stranded in a place she no longer recognized. That night, Emma sat beside her mother's bed as the fever worsened. There was no medicine, no comfort, just a wet cloth and whispered prayers. As dawn broke, her mother took her final breath in Emma's arms. Her body was still, her pain finally gone. But for Emma, the grief had only begun. The funeral was small. No one offered condolences. Denise didn't shed a tear. In the days that followed, Emma's sorrow was met not with compassion, but with command. Denise began parading her through the village, boasting of the upcoming marriage. "A wise girl knows when to stop dreaming," she'd say to the bakers and weavers. Emma's finally learned her place. The villagers nodded with indifference, some smirking, others whispering behind cupped hands. "She's being sold to that old man. Aunt Denise is clever, turning death into profit." Emma lowered her eyes as the comments followed her like shadows. She tried to stay quiet to let the storm pass, but every time she looked at her reflection, she saw someone she no longer recognized, a girl whose dignity was being chipped away by cruel hands. One evening, Denise threw a threadbare wrapper at Emma's feet and ordered her to serve drinks at the harvest celebration. "Let people see you're useful. A good wife knows how to serve." She snapped. Emma picked up the cloth without a word. Her heart ached, her spirit bruised, but she refused to break. Somewhere deep inside, she still carried the voice of her mother, the gentle reminder to never let the world harden her heart. But even that voice was fading beneath the weight of betrayal and loss. She had no home, no money, and no one left to protect her. Her future was being sold off to the highest bidder, and all she had left was the strength to say no, even if no one listened. As the day of the festival arrived, Emma felt more like a prisoner than a guest. The village was bright with color and song, but for her it was a parade of shame. She moved through the crowd with a tray in her hands, head bowed, step slow. The same people who once laughed at her generosity now judged her silence. "She brought this on herself," someone muttered. Too proud to marry smart when she had the chance. Emma clenched her fists. She wasn't proud, she was trying to survive. But pride was the only thing left that hadn't been taken from her. And though her dignity was bruised, it still lived inside her. It was that last flicker of defiance that reminded her she was not property, not a bargaining chip. She was still a person, even if the world refused to see it. The morning of the summer festival arrived beneath a sky painted with gold, and amber villagers bustled through the square, hanging ribbons, stacking fruit baskets, and preparing trays of drinks under the relentless sun. But for Emma, the day felt like a punishment wrapped in celebration. Aunt Denise had risen early, barking orders before the roosters crowed. "Tie that wrapper tight," she hissed, throwing a faded cloth at Emma's feet. "You may be poor, but at least look decent." Emma dressed in silence, her hands shaking as she wrapped the cloth around her waist. Each knot felt like a chain, each movement a surrender. Today she would serve drinks not as a hostess, but as a servant paraded for all to see. As she walked toward the festival grounds, balancing a tray, the murmurs had already begun. The celebration was a blur of color. Bright dresses, gold jewelry, musicians tapping rhythms on drums, and laughter that felt like salt on Emma's wounds. She weaved through the crowd with quiet grace, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. A woman sneered as Emma passed. "Faster, girl," she snapped. "Don't spill it this time." Emma kept her head low. Each step echoed with shame. Each glance reminded her of how far she had fallen. But just as she approached the center of the courtyard, a sudden hush rippled through the crowd. The drums faltered, conversations paused. Emma's gaze lifted and her breath caught in her throat. A man entered the festival grounds moving with quiet authority. Gone were the dusty clothes and dark glasses. No cane, no slouch. He wore a crisp, elegant tunic in deep blue, and his eyes, sharp and commanding, scanned the crowd like a man who had never begged for anything in his life. It was him, Ben, but not Ben. The man Emma had fed in secret, the one the children mocked and the villagers ignored, now stood tall and proud. The tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the ground in a scatter of cups and spilled juice. The noise cut through the silence like a whip. Aunt Denise's voice rose instantly. "Stupid girl. What now?" But Emma didn't hear her. She was frozen, eyes locked on the man, now walking slowly toward her. His name wasn't Ben anymore. It was Daniel. And with every step, he erased the image of the blind beggar she once knew. The villagers parted around him like waves. Whispers flew through the air, confusion giving way to awe. "Is that him?" someone muttered. "It can't be." Daniel stopped a few feet in front of Emma. He looked at her not with pity, not with mockery, but with the calm assurance of someone who had always known the truth. Then he turned to face the crowd. Raising one hand, his voice rang clear and steady. "You all saw me," he said. Sitting at the edge of the market covered in dust, blind, forgotten. Uneasy murmurs rippled through the crowd. Faces turned pale. Some of you laughed. Some of you threw stones. Most of you turned away. He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing, but one person did not. His gaze returned to Emma, and suddenly all eyes followed Emma's knees trembled. "This woman?" Daniel said, his voice filled with quiet pride, gave what little she had. Not for praise, not for attention, but because her heart knew what kindness was. The villagers stood stunned. Just days ago they had mocked her. Now they watched her wide-eyed and ashamed. Even Aunt Denise, who had begun to step forward, froze where she stood, her lips parted in disbelief. Daniel walked to the elders, seated beneath the festival canopy. "I return today not as a beggar, but as a man blessed with wealth and influence," he said, "and I've come to honor what true wealth means: compassion, dignity, and courage." Polite applause began to spread, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Some villagers clapped with red faces. Others dropped their eyes, but Daniel didn't wait for praise. He turned and walked back toward Emma, stopping just before her. In a voice only she could hear, he said, "I owe you more than words, but today I give you back what they tried to take, your dignity." He extended his hand. Emma hesitated. Her heart pounded. But then slowly she placed her hand in his, not as a beggar's friend, not as a servant, but as his equal. Around them the square was silent, and behind them Aunt Denise stumbled backward, collapsing onto a bench. For the first time in a long time, Emma didn't flinch. She didn't turn away. She stood tall, no longer hidden behind shame, but walking forward into a story she never thought would be hers. The festival ended that evening under the flicker of lanterns, but the whispers didn't fade. By sunrise, the entire village had a new tale to tell of Daniel, the beggar turned king, and Emma, the girl whose kindness had rewritten fate. Emma walked through town the next morning, not with pride, but with peace. Her head was high, not because Daniel had lifted her, but because he had simply reminded the world of who she truly was, and that truth once buried under judgment and cruelty had finally been seen not as weakness, but as undeniable strength. That evening the streets were quiet as Emma stood outside the house that no longer felt like home. Her belongings, a small bundle of worn clothes and a cracked wooden comb, lay at her feet. Aunt Denise had slammed the door behind her after spitting words that dripped with bitterness. "You think you're better than me now, walking around like a queen because some man spoke your name." But Emma didn't argue. She didn't flinch. With her chin lifted and her silence steady, she picked up her bundle and turned away. She had no destination, no promise of shelter or comfort, only a strange sense of freedom humming in her chest. Each step away from that house felt like peeling away a layer of shame. For the first time, she wasn't running, she was leaving, not in defeat, but in defiance. Hours passed as she walked along the edge of the village, the moon trailing her like a quiet guardian. The air was cool and the world felt uncertain, but Emma's mind was still. She had no plan yet. She didn't feel lost. Then, from behind a grove of trees, a small voice called out to her, "Miss Emma." A young boy no older than 10 ran toward her out of breath, but determined. "Daniel wants to see you," he said, clutching a folded note in his hand. Emma stared at the child, then took the note with trembling fingers. No words were written on the paper, only directions to the old community hall by the river. She nodded. The boy gave her a quick smile and darted off into the night. Curiosity mingled with fear as she made her way there, unsure of what she would find. Inside the hall, the air was thick with dust and old memories, but standing at the far end was Daniel. He looked different in the candlelight, not like a stranger in fine clothes, but like someone who had shed a heavy burden. Papers were spread across a large table in front of him. He smiled when he saw her. "You came," he said gently. Emma crossed the room, slowly unsure whether to speak. "I heard you stood up to your aunt." Daniel continued. "I did," Emma said, her voice steady, "because I had nothing left to lose." Daniel nodded. "That's where real strength begins." He gestured to the table. "I want to show you something." Emma stepped closer and saw documents, plans, and sketches. "I'm starting something new," he said. "A foundation for women like you. Women who deserve more than survival. I need someone to lead it." Emma stared at the pages in disbelief. "Why me?" she whispered. Daniel met her eyes without hesitation. "Because you understand what it means to be ignored, to be used, to be silenced, and yet you never let any of it steal your kindness. You didn't help me for gain. You helped me because it was right. That's the kind of leadership the world needs." For a moment, Emma said nothing. Her past flickered through her mind like a storm, her mother's fading breath, the hunger, the humiliation, the broken tray at the festival. "I don't want gold," she finally said. "I want to help other women say no. I want to show them that they're more than what others try to make them believe." Daniel smiled. "That's exactly why I chose you." And so the foundation was born, not with fanfare or fireworks, but with two people standing in a dusty hall, building something real. Emma threw herself into the work with a sense of purpose she'd never known before. She spoke at village gatherings, helped write policies, visited women in nearby towns, and sat with them in quiet rooms where their stories poured out like rivers. With every life she touched, Emma began to heal the parts of herself she hadn't realized were still broken. She was no longer the poor girl at the market or the servant in a borrowed wrapper. She was Emma, the leader of a future rooted in dignity, strength, and empathy. The villagers watched in quiet awe. Some whispered in jealousy, others in admiration, but Emma didn't care. She walked the same paths where once laughter chased her like daggers now, with her head held high and her mission clear. Aunt Denise's name faded from daily gossip, and Mr. Carter's proposal became nothing more than an old sour rumor. Emma had become something no one expected, a symbol of hope, not because she had been saved, but because she had chosen to rise. With Daniel as her partner, she wasn't just rewriting her story, she was opening a door for countless others to do the same. And as the foundation's walls rose from the ground, so did a new chapter one, built on compassion, truth and the courage to begin again. One quiet evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long golden streaks across the roof of the foundation building, Daniel stood beside Emma, watching a group of young women sewing inside the hall. Their laughter spilled softly into the warm air as they worked some stitching. Others practicing reading, all slowly shaping a future they never believed they could reach. Daniel looked at Emma, her face calm and proud, the fire in her spirit brighter than ever. He reached into his pocket, then turned toward her, his voice steady but low. "I came here searching for something," he said. "I thought I was testing the world, seeing if kindness still existed. But I wasn't looking for kindness. I was looking for you." Emma turned to him, her eyes already filled with quiet understanding. She didn't need grand speeches or glittering promises. Daniel opened his hand, revealing a simple hand-woven ring made from dried grass and a thin strand of cotton thread, delicate but intentionally crafted. "I don't offer you gold, Emma," he said, his voice full of truth. "I offer you my heart, my work, and a life built on something real. Not wealth, not image, but partnership equal and honest." Emma didn't respond right away. She studied the ring not for its material, but for its meaning. Her heart swelled, not from the gesture, but from everything that had led to it. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "not because I need saving, but because I choose you, and I choose the life we're building together." News of their engagement spread through the village faster than wildfire, carried by mouths that once spit rumors and judgments. And when the day of the wedding came, it was held beneath the town's oldest oak tree, a tree that had seen generations rise and fall, now standing tall as a witness to redemption. The villagers gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet respect. Emma stood in a soft linen dress, not adorned in jewels or silk, but in dignity and strength. Daniel waited beside her, dressed not as a tycoon, but as a man humbled by love. The air was thick with emotion, as those who once laughed at Emma now looked upon her with something deeper than surprise, something like admiration. As the vows were exchanged under the open sky, the whispers faded into silence. There were no chandeliers or orchestras, no gold coins tossed into the air. But what filled that space was something far more lasting: truth. The truth that love built on equality does not need spectacle. That dignity cannot be bought. And that kindness, when returned, is the most powerful force a soul can carry. Aunt Denise did not attend. She had long since disappeared from Emma's life like a storm that had finally run out of rain, and Emma did not look for her. She didn't need revenge. Her presence in that moment, standing beside Daniel as his equal, was proof enough that she had already won. In the weeks and months that followed, Emma and Daniel didn't retreat into luxury or bask in power. They worked. They traveled to nearby villages, building new branches of the foundation. They hosted workshops, mentored young leaders, and stood as an example that love could be rooted in shared purpose, not control or rescue. Every decision was made side by side. Emma's voice was never second, her perspective never dismissed. And slowly their story became legend, not because of the wealth Daniel once held, but because of the quiet revolution they ignited together. A revolution of compassion, of dignity, restored of love that lifts rather than binds. One evening, as they stood beneath the same oak tree where they had wed, Daniel looked at Emma and smiled. "You pretended to be blind," she said with a teasing glint in her eyes. "But now I see clearly." Daniel laughed, not with shame, but with joy. "And I finally see what real wealth is," he replied. Around them, the foundation buzzed with life, and the village, once a place of judgment, had become a place of growth. Emma took his hand, their fingers entwined, not just in affection, but in mission. And as they walked back home, they carried with them not a fairy tale, but a legacy built on kindness, carried by courage, and sealed with love that neither time nor trial could undo. If this story moved you, and if you believe that kindness, integrity, and courage still matter in today's world, we invite you to be part of our journey. Subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful stories that reveal the strength of the human spirit and remind us that dignity can't be bought, it must be earned. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Together, let's create a world where every voice matters and every act of compassion becomes a step toward lasting change.